The light did not explode outward. It did not fill the hall with noise or heat or drama. It rose slowly from the black stone of the throne, the way light rises from deep water when the sun is above it. It moved up through the armrests, along the back of the chair, and then settled around Cole Harrington, like something that had been waiting a long time, and was now, finally, at rest. Every sensor in the hall fired at once. The Velkari used sensor technology built into the walls of every official building. It was standard. It measured temperature, air quality, energy output, biological signs. The Hall of Ascendancy had sensors older than most human civilizations. And in that moment, every single one of them reported something the system had no category for. The translator units on the belts of 3 nearby officials made a sound they had never made before, and then went quiet. The temperature dropped 4 degrees. Counselor Jarun felt it on his skin and did not move. Cole sat in the throne, and the thing pressing against his mind was getting clearer. It was not a voice. It was not a vision. It was more like the feeling of a very large and very old presence sitting across a table from you and looking at you with total attention. Not hostile. Not warm either. Just completely, carefully focused on him. It was reading him. Cole had no way to know this at the time. He only knew that something was happening inside his head that he did not understand, and that his instinct, which had never failed him, was telling him to stay still. Not because moving would cause harm, but because running from something you did not yet understand was always the wrong first choice. So, he stayed still. The throne had been made by a civilization that no longer existed. The Velkari knew this much, and not much more. They had found the throne on their homeworld when they were still a young species, long before they had ships or space travel, or any understanding of what lay beyond their sky. They had built the Hall of Ascendancy around it. They had built their first empire around the idea of it, and for a time, it had given them emperors. Real ones, not kings who took the throne by birth or by force. People the throne had looked at and decided could be trusted. The last emperor chosen this way had ruled for 60 years and left the conclave stronger than he had found it. And it had stayed quiet for 4 centuries, turning away every person who sat in it with nothing more than a cold stone and silence. The Velkari had long since stopped believing it would wake again. Now it was awake, and it was looking at a human being from Ohio, and what it found was not what it had expected. The throne had seen many people in 400 years. Nobles who sat in it with their chests pushed out, certain they were the ones. Scholars who sat in it trembling with hope. Soldiers who sat in it because they thought strength was what it wanted. Every one of them had been turned away, because every one of them had wanted something from the throne. Cole Harrington did not want anything from it. When the throne pressed into his thoughts and found the thing that a person feels when they are given enormous power, it found nothing that resembled hunger or excitement or desire. What it found was closer to the feeling a person gets when they are handed a very complicated problem at the end of a very long day. Not joy, not ambition, just a quiet, tired recognition that something needed to be dealt with, and that if it was going to be dealt with properly, someone had to do it carefully. The throne had been designed by people who had learned, through long and painful history, that the only person who could be trusted with unlimited authority was someone who did not want it for themselves. So they had built something patient, something that could wait, something that would keep looking until it found the right shape of person. It had found that shape. Ambassador Lawson had pushed her way to within 20 feet of the platform. 2 Velkari guards had stepped in front of her, and then stopped, uncertain, because there was no protocol for this. No one had written instructions for what to do when the sovereign throne of Velkara activated for the first time in 400 years for a human diplomat. She could see Cole's face clearly. His jaw was set. His hands were on his knees. His eyes were open and looking straight ahead at something that was not in the room. She had seen that look before. She had seen it late at night in crisis rooms, when everything had gone wrong, and Cole had gone very quiet, and then slowly, methodically, started fixing things one piece at a time. She did not know what was happening to him, but she knew him well enough to know he was not going to fall apart. Around the hall, the Velkari officials were reacting in different ways. Some had backed away from the platform entirely. Some were talking fast and low into communication devices. Some were simply standing still, watching, because there was nothing in their training or their history that had prepared them for this, and their minds had not yet caught up. Jarun had not moved at all. His joke had started something, that much was clear. What exactly it had started was not yet clear to anyone in the room, but the light from the throne was still rising, and the signal it was broadcasting on every frequency it could reach was getting stronger. And the translation of that signal, which 3 separate systems finally managed to produce at almost the same moment, said the same thing in 3 different languages. It said, "Recognized." The word went through the hall like a cold wind through an open door. Cole felt the presence in his mind settle. It was not gone. It was just finished with the part where it was looking. It had seen what it needed to see. And in the space where it had pressed against his thoughts, there was now something that felt like an answer to a question he had not known he was being asked. He was still afraid. That had not changed. He was a man sitting in a very old chair on an alien planet, surrounded by alien officials, while something he did not understand had just done something very significant. And the natural human response to that was fear. But underneath the fear, something else had settled in. Responsibility. Not ambition, not excitement, just the quiet, familiar weight of a problem that had landed on him and was now his to handle, and the equally quiet, equally familiar knowledge that the only way through a problem was straight through it. He took a slow breath. Then he looked out at the hall. Hundreds of Velkari eyes looked back at him, pale and wide, in a silence so deep it had a kind of weight to it. Cole said nothing yet. He was still thinking. He was, as he almost always was in the first moments of a crisis, figuring out what he actually knew before he said a single word. Behind the crowd, Counselor Jarun stood alone. His aide had moved away without him noticing. The clicking laughter from earlier was completely gone. He was looking at the platform where a human from Ohio sat in the sovereign throne of Velkara, while it glowed with 400-year-old light. And he was feeling something he had not felt in a very long time. He was feeling like he had made a very serious mistake. The first thing the Velkari High Court did was hold an emergency session. The second thing they did was hold another emergency session, because the first one had ended with 3 senior officials shouting at each other in a language that did not translate well, and one very old counselor nearly fainting. Cole was not in either session. He was in a small side room off the main diplomatic wing, sitting at a plain table with a cup of something warm that smelled almost like coffee and tasted nothing like it. Ambassador Lawson was across from him. Neither of them had spoken for almost 5 minutes. Then Lawson said, "How are you doing?" It was not really a question. It was the kind of sentence people say when they want to give someone a moment to decide how honest to be. Cole looked at the cup. "I have no idea what just happened, but I think I'm going to need a lot more of this." He held up the cup. Lawson almost smiled. Outside the room, the conclave was not handling things well. The throne's signal had gone out on every frequency, which meant every planet in the conclave's 17 systems had received it. News moved fast in a civilization with good communication technology. Within 6 hours, every major news network in the conclave was running the story. Within 12 hours, the signal had reached the outer edge of the Conclave's broadcasting range, which meant species that were not even members of the Conclave knew that something had happened on Velkara. On Earth, the story arrived in pieces. The first reports were incomplete and confusing. Some networks said a human diplomat had broken a priceless artifact. Some said there had been a diplomatic incident of unknown severity. One small outlet, working off a partial translation of the throne's signal, published a headline that read, "Ohio man accidentally declared emperor of alien civilization," which was shared widely and with great enthusiasm, despite nobody being sure yet if it was accurate. It was, more or less, accurate. The official declaration produced by the throne systems named Cole Harrington as the recognized sovereign of the Velkari Conclave. It used old language, the kind that had not been used in active governance for 4 centuries, but the meaning was clear enough. The Conclave's own legal scholars spent 2 days going through every precedent they had, and came back with the same answer each time. The throne's recognition was binding under the Conclave's founding charter. Nobody had ever written a rule for undoing it, because nobody had ever thought it would need to be undone. There was no mechanism for that, either. Cole was handed a summary of the legal situation by a Velkari official, who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. He read it carefully, twice, asked 2 questions, thanked her, and then sat with it for a long time. Over the next 3 days, a series of increasingly senior Velkari officials came to speak with him. They all had slightly different approaches. Some were formal and cold. Some tried to be friendly in a stiff way that did not quite land. Some were openly hostile and did not bother to hide it. One very senior official spent 40 minutes explaining in patient detail why the situation was impossible, unprecedented, and deeply problematic for the political stability of the Conclave, as if Cole might not have noticed. Cole listened to all of them. He asked questions, not challenging ones, real ones. The kind of questions that told the person he was listening carefully and wanted to understand things correctly. Some of the officials were thrown off by this. They had come in ready for argument, and found instead a quiet man with a notepad and a lot of questions about how things actually worked. On the 4th day, a small Velkari woman named Devashan came to see him. She was old. Her gray skin had a slightly faded look, and she moved slowly, but her eyes were the sharpest Cole had seen in any species on this planet. She had been a member of the High Court for 40 years. She worked in what was called structural administration, which sounded very boring and was actually the work of trying to make large governments function properly. She had spent 4 decades writing proposals for reform, presenting them to the court, and watching them get set aside by people who found the current structure more personally convenient. She sat down across from Cole, looked at him for a moment, and said, "I hear you have been asking questions." "I have," he said. "Good ones, from what I am told. I'm trying to understand what I'm actually dealing with." She looked at him a little longer. Then she opened the case she had brought with her, and took out a stack of documents. Not data pads, actual printed documents, because Devashant had always believed that important things should be held in your hands. "These," she said, "are the things that are broken." It was thick. "And these," she said, bringing out a second, slightly smaller stack, "are the things I have been trying to fix for 40 years. Cole picked up the first document and started reading. He and Devashan talked for 6 hours that day. She explained things clearly and did not soften them. She told him which parts of the conclave system were failing and why. She told him which officials had been blocking reform and what they were protecting. She told him which systems were working well and deserved to be left alone. She talked about the people inside the conclave who had been trying to do good work quietly for years. The ones who had been pushed to the edges because they were inconvenient to the people in the center. Cole took notes, real ones, by hand, on paper he had asked Lawson to get him from the human delegation supplies. His handwriting was small and very neat. The Secretary of State had issued 2 careful public statements that said very little. 3 congressional committees had announced hearings. Editorials were being written. Most of them were either very proud of Cole in a general way, or very worried about the political implications, sometimes both at once in the same piece. Cole's mother, Patricia Harrington, was asked by a reporter standing outside her house what she thought about her son being recognized as sovereign of an alien empire. She thought for a moment, and then said that Cole had always been very responsible, and she was sure he would figure it out. Then she asked the reporter to move off her lawn because she had just planted new grass. Ja-Run, who had submitted a request for transfer to a posting in another star system, was still waiting for approval. In the meantime, he was avoiding the main halls where people might want to discuss what had happened. He had not spoken publicly. He had not issued a statement. He was doing what people who have made large public mistakes often do, which was staying very quiet and hoping something else would become the bigger story. Nothing else became the bigger story. At the end of the 3rd week, Cole set down his pen, looked at the stack of notes he had built up, and told Ambassador Lawson that he was ready to hold a formal session of the High Court. Lawson looked at his notes and then looked at him. "Do you know what you're going to say?" "Yes," he said. "Are you going to be all right?" Cole thought about that for a second. Then he said, "I think so. I've been in harder rooms." Lawson looked like she wanted to argue with that, but she did not, because she had also been in some of those rooms, and she knew he was not wrong. The session was scheduled for 3 days later. Cole spent those 3 days rereading everything, checking his facts, and making sure every claim he intended to make could be supported by something in writing. He did not practice a speech. He never practiced speeches. He just made sure he understood what he was going to say and why he was going to say it. On the morning of the session, he put on his best suit, which was not very impressive by Valkyrie ceremonial standards, but was clean and well-fitted, and he picked up his folder of printed documents, and he walked toward the hall. Devashan was waiting for him outside the door. She looked at the folder in his hand and gave a small nod. "Paper," she said. "Paper," he agreed. She held the door open for him, and he walked in. The hall of the High Court was smaller than the Hall of Ascendancy, but not by much. It had the same dark stone walls and the same long rows of seats. At the far end, there was a raised platform where a speaker could stand and address the court. The seats on both sides were filled. Every counselor who could reach Velkara in 3 days had come. Some had traveled a very long way. None of them wanted to miss this. Cole walked to the platform and put his folder on the small surface in front of him. He looked out at the room. Hundreds of pale Valkyrie eyes looked back. The silence was the kind that had weight to it. He did not begin with a greeting. He did not thank the court for gathering. He said, "I am going to speak plainly, because I think the situation calls for it." A few officials shifted in their seats. He opened his folder. "Over the past 3 weeks," he said, "I have read every document that Counselor Devashan provided me, along with every piece of public record I could access about how this conclave operates. I want to share what I found, and then I want to tell you what I think should happen next." He paused for just a moment to let the room settle. Then he began. The presentation took about 40 minutes. Cole spoke clearly and moved through the material in a straight line, one point after the next, without circling back or repeating himself. He described the conclave's governance structure and showed where it was working. He described where it was not working. He named 6 major problems, and for each one, he had supporting documents, records, reports, internal communications that had never been made public, that showed not just that the problem existed, but how long it had existed, and who had known about it. 3 of the 6 problems had been concealed, not by accident, by choice, by a small group of senior officials who had personally benefited from the problems staying problems. The documents made this clear, and Cole did not soften the language. He laid out what the documents showed and let the court look at them. The hall got very quiet during that part. When he was about 20 minutes in, one of the officials he had named stood up. His name was Counselor Venthal, and he had been on the High Court for 30 years, and he was used to being the person in the room that other people did not interrupt. He said loudly, "By what right does a creature from a minor world, with no history in this chamber, no understanding of our systems, and no standing in our civilization, presume to stand here and speak of restructuring the oldest government in the known galaxy?" He said it as if the question itself was enough to end the discussion. The room waited. Cole looked at him. He did not look away. He also did not look angry. He just looked steady, the way a person looks when they have heard a hard question before, and are not afraid of it. He said, "I did not ask for any of this. I want to be clear about that. I was brought to this hall under false pretenses, guided to that throne as a joke, and the throne responded in a way that nobody planned for. I spent the first week trying to find a legal way to decline what it offered. I was told by your own scholars, 3 of them, independently, that no such way exists." He paused. "So I am here because I am stuck here. And because I am stuck here, I am going to do this the right way. Not because I want power. I don't want it. But the work needs doing, and I am the one who is here. And where I come from, that is enough of a reason to get started." He looked back at his folder. "I have 7 more minutes of material. I would like to finish." Venthal sat down. Cole finished. The last part of the presentation was the part that was not about problems. It was about the people inside the conclave who had been trying to solve them. He named them. He named Devashan, and the work she had been doing for 40 years. He named 2 younger officials who had submitted reform proposals that had been quietly shelved by the same group that had been hiding the problems. He named a communications officer on one of the outer planets who had been flagging a safety issue in the resource distribution system for 6 years and had never received a response. He said that these people had not been given the tools or the authority to fix what they saw. He intended to change that. Not by ruling the conclave forever, not by replacing its systems with something human, but by using the authority the throne had given him, which he had not asked for and did not want, but apparently could not give back, to clear the path for the people who already knew how to do the work. He described a reform plan. It was specific. It had a timeline. It had names attached to each part. At the end of the reform period, there would be a new charter, one that established elected leadership with term limits, transparent governance, and independent oversight. When that charter was ratified, the authority of the throne would pass to the structures it created, and Cole Harrington would go home. He closed his folder. The hall was very quiet. Then Devashan, who was sitting in the 3rd row, began to applaud. It was the slow, deliberate Valkyrie form of applause, both hands pressed together and then apart in a steady rhythm. Not fast, not loud, but clear. One official joined her, then 2 more, then a section of the room, then most of it. Not all of it. Venthal did not move. 3 of his allies did not move. But the majority of the hall was applauding, and some of them were doing it in the human way, quickly and with more noise, because they had been watching enough human media in recent weeks to know that was also an option. Cole stood at the platform and did not smile. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had just said what needed to be said and was now thinking about the very large amount of work that came next. Ambassador Lawson was standing at the back of the hall. She had not been given an official seat, because she was not a member of the court, but nobody had tried to stop her from coming in. She watched the room applaud, and felt something in her chest that she was not going to describe out loud, but was approximately the feeling of being very proud of someone, and also very relieved at the same time. 14 hours later, a recording of the session reached the open communication networks. It took about 6 hours after that for it to reach Earth. The comments on the most shared version ran into the tens of thousands within a day. They were mostly people saying the same things in different ways. Some were proud. Some were amazed. A very large number were pointing out that Cole Harrington's father was an electrician and his mother was a schoolteacher, and he had just stood in front of the oldest governing body in the known galaxy and presented a 40-minute plan to fix it. One comment, which was shared more than any other, simply said, "Of course he had paper." Cole did not see any of this for several days because he was already deep in the work. There was a great deal of it. The reforms took 3 years. Not 3 years of arguing, not 3 years of slow, painful nothing. 3 years of actual work, the kind that starts early and ends late and does not look impressive from the outside, but changes everything anyway. Cole stayed on Velcara for all of it. He learned to speak Valkyrie. Not perfectly, his accent was strange, and some of his vowels were wrong, in ways that made young Valkyrie children cover their mouths when they heard him try. But he could negotiate without a translator by the end of the first year, which mattered more than sounding right. It meant that when he sat across a table from a Valkyrie official in a difficult conversation, there was nothing in the middle of that conversation except the two of them. He worked with Devashan every day. She knew where every broken thing was, and why it had broken, and who had decided not to fix it. He had the authority to act on what she knew. Together, they moved through the 6 problems from his presentation, one at a time, and when they were done with those 6, they found 4 more, and when they were done with those, they found 2 more after that. This was not a surprise to either of them. Large governments that have not been properly maintained for a long time are like old buildings. You come in to fix the roof and discover the foundation also needs work. They fixed the foundation too. The safety issue in the resource distribution system, the one the communications officer on the outer planet had been flagging for 6 years, turned out to be connected to a much larger problem in how the Conclave managed supply routes to its 3 smallest member worlds. Fixing it properly took almost 8 months. The communications officer, whose name was Brevshan, was brought to Velcara to help lead that part of the work. She was very good at it. She had been very good at it for years. She just had not been given the chance before. Cole went home twice during the 3 years. The first time was for his father's retirement. His father, a quiet man named Gary Harrington, had spent 35 years fixing electrical problems in old buildings and was very ready to stop. The party was held in the backyard of the house where Cole had grown up. There were folding chairs and a gas grill and a lot of people from the neighborhood. Gary shook Cole's hand and said, "I hear things are going well out there." Cole said they were getting there. His father nodded like that was the right answer. The second time he went home was when his younger sister Laura had her first child. Cole had promised he would be there, and he was. He held the baby for a long time and did not say much. Laura asked him if he was okay, and he said he was just tired, which was true, but also it was something else that he did not have a word for. Something about holding something very small and new, while also carrying something very large and old. Ambassador Lawson visited 4 times over the 3 years. She was technically no longer assigned to the Velcara situation. Her posting had changed after the first year, but she kept coming back anyway. She would review the progress reports, walk through the parts of the Conclave's work she understood best, and then sit across a table from Cole and drink the almost coffee and not say what she was thinking, which was that she had never seen a person carry this much and hold it this steadily. She did tell him once that he should sleep more. He said he was working on it. She did not believe him. Venthal and his allies had not disappeared. They had lost a great deal of influence in the first year, as the documents from Cole's presentation led to formal investigations, and 3 officials left the court under uncomfortable circumstances. But Venthal himself stayed, and he watched, and occasionally he made procedural arguments designed to slow things down. Cole did not fight him directly. He just kept working. In his experience, the most effective response to someone who was trying to slow things down was to have already finished the thing before they could finish the argument about it. By the end of the second year, Venthal's procedural arguments had become much quieter, because most of the things he had been arguing against were already done. Near the end of the third year, Devashan brought Cole a draft of the new charter. It had taken 14 months to write. Every member species of the conclave had sent representatives to the drafting process. There had been arguments and long nights, and at least one meeting that had lasted 31 hours without a real break, but it was done. Cole read it twice. He made 4 small suggestions. The fourth, which was about the exact language used in one section on term limits, led to another 2 weeks of discussion before it was resolved. But it was resolved. The ratification ceremony was held in the Hall of Ascendancy. Every member species sent their most senior official. The hall was full in a way it had not been in a very long time. Devashan signed the charter first, because Cole had insisted on it. She signed it slowly and with great care, because she was holding a pen that had spent 40 years waiting for this moment, and she knew it. Then the other signatures, one by one down a long table, in the old language and in the new. When it was done, Cole stood at the edge of the platform and looked at the room. It was loud now, not quiet. Velkari officials were clicking and pressing their palms together. Humans from the diplomatic corps were applauding. 2 species that had been in serious disputes with each other 18 months ago were standing next to each other and not visibly hostile, which was the best outcome that section of the work had been able to produce, and was still, honestly, better than anyone had expected. He felt Devashan beside him. "You should be proud," she said. "I'm tired," he said. She clicked softly. It was a Velkari sound that meant something close to fair enough. Later, after the ceremony had ended and the hall was quieter, Cole went back to the throne. He had not sat in it again in 3 years. Not once. He had walked past it many times. He had stood near it a few times, looking at it the way you look at something that changed your life in a direction you did not choose. But he had not sat down. Now he sat down. The light came again, slow and deep, that color without a name. It came up through the stone, the same way it had on the first day, unhurried and certain. Cole sat in it and felt the presence again. The same presence, still old, still patient, but different now, in a way he could feel without being able to fully describe. It was not looking at him this time. It had finished looking at him a long time ago. It was doing something else. It was witnessing. It was paying attention in the way that something pays attention when it has watched you carry a heavy thing a long way, and you have finally set it down properly. Cole sat in the light for a long time and thought about Ohio. He thought about his father's hands. He thought about his mother's classroom in the late afternoon, when the light came through the windows at a low angle and made everything look simple and clear. He thought about holding his sister's baby. He thought about all the people on 17 worlds who would go to sleep tonight in a system that was a little more fair than it had been 3 years ago, and who would not know his name. And that was fine. That was actually exactly how it was supposed to be. Then he stood up. He shook Devashan's hand in the human way, which she had long since gotten used to, and he told her the place was hers. She looked at him. "You could stay longer," she said. "There is still work." "There is always still work," he said. "That's why the oversight body exists. That's why you're going to lead it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Go home, Cole Harrington." He went home. He caught the next transport and sat by the small window and watched Velkara get smaller behind the glass until it was just a point of light among other points of light. And then he closed his eyes and slept for the first time in 3 years without something pressing on the edge of his thoughts. In the hall behind him, the throne's light faded slowly. Not all at once, not quickly, the way a fire fades at the end of a long evening, when the people have gone home and the room is warm and quiet and safe. It had been waiting 400 years for the right person. It had learned that the right person did not come quickly, and did not come loudly, and did not come looking for a throne. The right person came because the work needed doing, and they were there. The light settled low and slow into the black stone, and the Hall of Ascendancy went quiet. It would wait again, if it needed to. But it did not think it would need to, for a very long time. The hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high that it looked like the inside of a mountain. The walls were made of dark stone that had been cut so smooth, it looked like glass. There were long rows of seats on both sides, and every seat was filled with alien officials in long robes. Their skin was gray, and their eyes were wide and pale, and they clicked their tongues when they talked to each other, which was what the Valkyrie did instead of whispering. Cole Harrington walked into that hall and kept his face very still. He was not a big man. He was not a man who looked important. He had short brown hair, a clean-cut face, and the kind of posture that said he had been trained to stand straight, but had never really enjoyed it. He was 34 years old. He came from a small city in Ohio. His mother taught 4th grade. His father fixed electrical problems in old buildings. Cole had grown up with the smell of metal and old books, and nothing in his life had prepared him for this room. But he did not show any of that. Ambassador Diana Lawson walked beside him. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a calm way of moving that made people think she was always in charge, even when she was not. She had been working in galactic diplomacy for 18 years. She had stood in rooms full of aliens before. But even she looked around at the hall with something careful in her eyes. The Valkyrie Conclave had ruled 17 star systems for 3,000 years. They had technology that humans were still trying to understand. They had ships that could cross a solar system in a day. They had been watching Earth since before the first airplane ever flew. And for most of that time, they had not thought much of humans at all. That was the problem, really. Humans had only been traveling between stars for about 200 years. That was nothing to a species like the Valkyrie. It was like a child walking into a room full of old men and expecting to be taken seriously. The Valkyrie were polite about it, most of the time. They let human diplomats attend their summits. They signed trade agreements. They said the right words. But they did not actually respect humans. Not deep down. Counselor Jarun was standing near the far end of the hall when the human delegation walked in. He was a senior member of the Valkyrie High Court, which meant he had more power than most creatures in the known galaxy. He was also, at that moment, bored and annoyed, in the way that powerful people sometimes get when they have been forced to share a room with people they consider beneath them. He watched Cole Harrington walk in and felt something sharp and unpleasant in his chest. This was what Earth sent, this small, quiet man with his cheap suit and his careful walk. This was the human that the Earth government thought was good enough to stand in the Hall of Ascendancy. Jarun leaned toward his aide and said something in a low voice. The aide clicked, quietly. At the center of the hall, on a raised platform of black stone, sat the throne. It was not decorated. It was not gold or jeweled or carved with patterns. It was just a chair, cut from a single piece of black rock that had come from a dead star. It was old. Nobody knew exactly how old. The Valkyrie scientists who had studied it for centuries had never been able to date it properly. The technology inside it was older than anything else the Valkyrie had ever found, and most of that technology still did not make sense to them. The last emperor had died 400 years ago. Since then, the conclave had been run by a council, but the throne still stood in the Hall of Ascendancy, and the old stories about it had never gone away. The stories said the throne would choose, not a bloodline, not a title, not a species. It would choose a person when it found the right one, and it had not found the right one in 400 years. Most Velkari officials privately believed the stories were just stories, something pretty to repeat at ceremonies. Jarun believed that too, which was why he thought his idea was funny. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who was used to people making space for him. He reached two junior officials near the human delegation and spoke to them quietly. Then they moved toward Ambassador Lawson and began talking to her about the trade documents she had brought, pointing at specific sections, asking questions, pulling her attention gently but firmly away from Cole. A third official appeared at Cole's side. "Lieutenant Commander Harrington," the official said in smooth English, "we have a small cultural demonstration prepared. It is traditional for visiting delegations to be shown the throne up close. It would be considered a mark of respect if you would approach." Cole looked at the official. He then looked toward Ambassador Lawson, who was 20 feet away and deep in a conversation she had not chosen to be in. He looked back at the throne. It was a chair. It was a very old chair, and every part of his training told him that in a diplomatic setting, refusing a cultural gesture was a bad idea. "Of course," he said. He walked to the platform. He could feel the room watching him. Not in the obvious way, where people turn their heads. In the quiet way, where everyone stops moving just a little bit, and the air in the room changes. Jarun stood near the back and watched. Cole reached the base of the platform and looked up at the throne. Up close, the black stone had a strange texture to it. It did not look like any rock he had ever seen. It looked like it was very slightly moving, the way the surface of dark water moves when something far below is breathing. He put his foot on the first step, then the second, then he turned and sat down. The hall went completely silent. It was not the silence of a room where people have stopped talking. It was the silence of a room where people have stopped breathing. Every Velkari official, every aide, every guard stood perfectly still. Then the throne began to glow. It started deep inside the stone, that light. It was not a color that had a name in English or in Velkari. It was dark and it was bright at the same time, and it moved slowly, like something waking up after a very long sleep. Cole sat in the throne and felt something press against the inside of his mind. It was not painful. It was not loud. It was just there, the way a hand on your shoulder is there, quiet and certain, and not asking for permission. He did not move. Ambassador Lawson pushed through the crowd. When she finally got close enough to see his face, she stopped. Cole looked afraid. That was clear. But he had not stood up. He had not run. He was sitting in that old black chair, while something ancient and unknown pressed through his thoughts, and his hands were flat on his knees, and his face was steady. Lawson had worked with Cole for 3 years. She had seen him stay calm when ships lost power in deep space. She had seen him stay calm when negotiations collapsed at 3 in the morning and everyone else was panicking. She had never seen him look like this, and she had never seen him fail to hold on. Behind her, Counselor Jarun had stopped laughing. The light from the throne was getting brighter,